Revealed finally why life won't let more people be more conscious. A dam can tolerate one small leak, even 2 or 3. But beyond that, well, forget it. And now for today's update on the threat of neural flooding in the city. There is no such threat. Men made up words like dumb and stupid, though they signify naught, to try and explain why they act like they do. Topography in the real world. Yeah, that one. The king offered a substantial prize for anyone who could make an amount of water disappear permanently. Nobody asked, but some of these, it seems if you would give it the right kind of pause and pondering, such as I tried to exemplify with my low dramatics, it's like saving years and years and thousands of dollars of college tuition. I mean, right there, we just covered theology, psychology, chemistry, physics, ecology into 2 or 3 centuries from now that they'll never catch up. But, I mean, if you pass it up, it's your fault. As he sat with his newspaper, pursuing an item concerning labor statistics, a man suddenly thought, do you realize that any job other than that of growing food is simply some form of entertainment? He sat stunned for a bit, then began trying to see if this could somehow also be applied to the workings of a man's mind. The simple, even when educated and traveled, will attempt to evidence their intelligence by proclaiming that man now lives in uniquely trying times. And if they really want to make a splash, they'll give it a name. Gad, the simple. What can you say about them other than, Gad, are they simple? Since it's obvious what needs be done to bring one's attention under control, men have compiled an endless litany of proposed approaches and methods to help save them from having to confront the matter head on. The ha moral. Ha! Anyone who thinks that man doesn't know what he's doing will also think the same of life. Ha! Driving along one day feeling, for no particularly apparent reason, quite pleased to be alive, a man thought to himself, it's easier to be angry than happy, and easier to be angry if you feel bad. And easier to feel bad if you don't try to feel otherwise, so there. And on he drove. Conversation overheard outside a laboratory. All science is mathematics. You mean that all science is ultimately reducible to a mathematical equation? No, I mean that all science, just like mathematics, is made up, non-existent, and never reaches a final number in its counting. We now return you to your normal mental hallway, where you don't have to think about such things. The continuing belief of the simple. If the gods don't save us, the government will. And if it begins to let us down, the gods will surely step back in. And now a feature, why it is better to be a human than a hyena. Well, I should think that's pretty obvious, because hyenas lack the ability to believe that any superior force will ever do anything to their advantage. One guy says, I didn't used to believe in any of those conspiracy theories until I began trying to bring my consciousness under my own control. And now, well, after seeing how difficult it is, well, I just don't know anymore. The entire normal world of man's intellect is built on nothing. Nothing, that is, compared to the reality of food, water, and sunshine. Does this not reveal both the dazzling wonder and curious irrelevancy of this human singularity? What they don't teach you in routine city school, that the opposite of anything is the same thing. Looking out to the west of the city, a man mused in some wonder. Is it not strange to realize that in that direction reside people living hours behind us in time? Then he looked in a similar manner at his own nervous system and was even more struck. An alert man's maxim updating. Those struggling to expand their consciousness are far beyond the merely impossible pale of trying to lift themselves up by their own bootstraps. Nay, they're at the place wherein they must push their present into the future using only their own intellect. For direction and assistance, a man wrote to Dr. No Name, "Dear Doctor, what is the difference, or is there a difference, between intelligence and attention?" And the doctor replied, "No, there is not, but only if you include a certain modifier before the word attention." Yep. If the motto of routine existence is maximum efficiency with minimal effort, is it any wonder how difficult it is to extend one's individual mental operations? There was once a king who built himself a castle, but he was a rather minor figure, just one ruler amongst many. And the palace perforce reflected his status. So he began a remodeling program which lasted until his death, whereby he continually repainted, resurfaced, and expanded the castle's exterior, while internally, wherein rested his apparent seat of authority, things remained as had they always been. This is the fate of all minor minds and captives of collective consciousness. Okay, since I've already given it away anyway, sort of piecemeal, let's spell it out point blank. Yes, there is a conspiracy, and its name is maximum efficiency with minimal effort. How life, being balanced and equitable, compensates for variations from species to species. Dogs have masters, men personalities. Although his credentials seemed valid enough, upon closer examination, one man discovered he was not who he claimed to be. Whilst reading, a man came upon this sentence: "Feeling their lives to be without purpose or known direction, modern man has turned with great hope to the young science of psychology." He stopped there and pondered the scene depicted, and almost immediately noted to himself, "At first that sounds meaningful and descriptive, but it fails to speak plainly. For the science of psychology was not there for man to turn to in his need, but was invented by man because of the need." No true mystic listening to this needs any moral attached thereto. Debatable weirdness update. Whether UFOs exist or not is irrelevant unless your mind is one of their local landing sites. The simple always believe that some particular time was more significant in the history of humanity than others, while the more complex realize that all eras are striking and seamlessly singular. Strikingly and seemingly singular. Papa, is this why mystics never go anywhere? That's right, son. Where do they have to go? The first speaker stated the subject for the discussion: man, a monkey with a bigger brain. And immediately one of the other participants responded by asking, A bigger brain than what? And the opening speaker replied, bigger than necessary to just be a monkey. And all was quiet for several moments until a third voice mused aloud, then why doesn't he put it to full use, I wonder? And it all fell apart from there. Ordinary thought to the more conscious is like a freeze-dried version of yesterday's rain. Okay, a definition. The enlightened, those with invisible slickers to protect themselves from the imaginary rains. The lengths to which some people will go to get smaller. So ruminated one man. If a parable is a short allegory, and a proverb is a short parable, then what is even more condensed than a proverb? And then it hit him. Life itself. One man sat at home and went everywhere, while another man went everywhere but never left home. What are you going to do? How are you ever going to win? Drugs work best on an empty stomach, as does stupidity on the mind. Arising abruptly from his chair in his library, spurred by a certain insight, a man was moved to aloud declare, did not men wish to be led and told what to do, there would be no governments, religions, or world of academia. This shout awoke the dog at his feet sufficient for it to muse, yeah, and also, I wouldn't have you, and you wouldn't have me, and plus, what does that say about the relationship between what you call your consciousness and what normally passes through it? I ask you, is it probably not a good thing that men can't read the minds of other creatures? After the young man had been away for several years at the mystical school, he wrote home to his mama, one of the future benefits I can already perceive from my involvement in this activity is the amount of money I will save on entertainment. How to measure the progress of those who don't believe in the obvious? Save your effort. Shaking a fist at the city, a man announced, I will be impressed with progress when scientific studies of satire are possible. You do realize by now that the reason I must make up stories like this is because they cannot actually occur in the ordinary world. Civilization, that is the flock, has many strange things. But suicidal tendencies, considering it to be a distinct entity, is not one of them. But then, of course, it is not a distinct entity anyway, so what are you going to do? Hey, wait a minute, says a guy. Do you mean this seriously, or is this a satire of some kind? The simple solution to the mystic's conundrum. How can those more conscious and anxious to develop control over their attention and extend the scope of their individual consciousness do so without becoming laden with anxiety? Easy. Succeed in doing it. The more alert man's walking around proverb. A good memory is like a rash on the inside of the devil's thighs. Another way to be sure that you're still ordinary and simple is that whenever you're exposed to reality being put under a dissector's scalpel, you automatically assume he's a pathologist and that the results will be a critique. I'll take two. During a lemonade break, a guy thought, a more conscious man would be like an elephant among fleas, or else like an elephant that ended up on the wrong planet. The battle cry of the wounded, help, I'm wounded. Oh, wait. No, that should have read, battle cry of the ordinary. All right. Simple sheep always believe that the flock as a whole knows better what is good for them than they do. This in spite of the right out in the open fact that there is no such thing as the flock as a whole. All right, everyone knows this, but only mystics can deal with it without their sweaters becoming unraveled. The original effort to individually stabilize one's consciousness started out pretty simple. But boy, just look at it now. The 3 stages of a mystic's public revelations. First, he explains the obscure. Then he explains the even more obscure. And finally, he explains the obvious. For anyone whose memory goes back several hours or days, I had dealt with some of these questions, and several ended up connected, whether I'd read them all or not. Someone asked if I would say anything about any possible effects that this sort of stuff has on the general scope and nature of civilization, which I had started once, and several more got added to it. Does the general parade of ordinary progress ever get off course? And a new one, how about some light on the non-circumspect path to enlightenment? Do you recall I had mentioned the old mentalist trick, stage magician, they used to call it mentalist, trick of the one-ahead reading, of taking the questions and having a shield in the audience, and you remember that? Well, if anybody just tuned in, you open the first question and you say, you hold it up first, and you say, the first question is, will I get my new job? And somebody out in the audience goes, wow! And he goes, wait a minute, and it's signed JB. And he goes, yeah, JB, that's me. And so you open it and you read it, but that was a shill. You already knew that one, so you're reading a real question from a civilian that says, can you guess my wife's name? And so you say, yep. So then you're one ahead all the time, and you keep pretending that you just, and so you go, the next question you go, someone here wants to know what their, not sister, someone wants to know what their wife's name is. And then a real person goes, my God. And you open it and just do kind of check, what's my wife's name? But you're reading the next question, like who's going to win the 3rd race at Saratoga Saturday. And so you just throw them aside, and it's known as the one-ahead reading. And about as far as we got with that, it was me insinuating in what I assume most of you thought was some allegorical manner, either that or you couldn't deal with it, of being able to use that yourself, because everyone believes that they have these questions about life, and especially someone who thinks they might be interested in whatever this appears to be, that the secret, even I keep saying that, in fact I like it better, nobody asked me. Okay, I asked me. Oh no, let me see. I want to know which one I like better. How do you do that? Of me referring to it instead of enlightenment or awakening and the liberation of the mind, which is all fine, but it's to actually know the secret. For some reason, do you actually like that personally? Do you actually? I got it again. The same reason I started using mystical, the word is so basic and exemplary for our kind of purposes, but it's fallen into over several hundreds of years such intellectual disrepute. I decided to bring it back and just use it just constantly for a while, just point blank like an ordinary sane person. No turban on, no robes, nothing religious. And keep referring to mystic because I assume that's got to give a handful of people that think they're interested in such as this a supreme irritation in their lower posterior parts probably, which is good for them. Remember, a good memory, if you know how to use it, is that kind of thigh inside of the devil's thighs. It's the kind of thing that would help spur you on to bring your own attention under control, should you know how to use it. Or if not, you can always get some powder and put it in your knickers. The one-ahead method, you can either take it as being some sort of surely obscure allegory, because if any of you thought that it was an obvious allegory immediately, I'm almost inclined to stop the taping and ask you to explain why you thought it was an obvious allegory. It's just the kind of thing that sounds probably obscure enough for some people that they go, hey, that's got to be heavy and deep if I had time to figure out what the hell it means. I mean, you get the trick, how that works, but then for me to infer like, all right, now the point is to be able to use that inside of your own mind. All right, now let's go into something else. And you think, boy, that's heavy. What if all of the questions, what I was going to get to, let me bring up an example again to slip up on something. We were talking about the news. The news is, at least in the Western world, after World War II over here, has been considered a profession. Serious business, and now in the last few years it has begun to slip in popularity, and it's begun to slip insofar as all polling and investigations, the public's attitude that those in the news media now are down there is poorly thought of as attorneys and priests, and that the whole profession, the reliability, is just fallen to the level of trash journalism. The one point I didn't get to, you do realize we're not taking sides here. We're pointing out what journalism has been considered a serious profession, and how in the last half a decade it has really begun to take its serious knocks with some validity. Not that you and I have to agree with the judgment that's becoming tabloid journalism, even the serious network news, but the point is it has simply changed, and it now reflects the same sorts of things that are in the trash journalism, as they call it, the tabloids, that this is now the mainstay of serious news reporting. Mm-hmm. So, do you understand, though, that we could take two different generations and they would have two different views of it? Assume we're talking about sort of the mainstream, let's say, of American life. And if we had someone who was now 50, an educated, sophisticated person that subscribes to news magazines, stays up to date, that kind of what we used to consider in the civilized Western world a modern, up-to-date, concerned, well-read, well-informed citizen, voter, taxpayer, and all that kind of thing. His view of journalism now, the news, would be what we are describing. He would be one of the ones that would read an absolute frontal attack on the morality, the professionalism of the major news outlets in this country, that it has now risen to such low depths that he can handle something like that. It has risen to such low depths it gives a whole new definition of the dumbing of America. That now is certainly, I'm using that kind of attitude, a 50-year-old, educated, sophisticated person. Their view would be, we take this one man, would be in complete agreement with this kind of new derision and explanation and view of journalism and the news media in general, that it is now at such a low level. It is now at the same kind of level as not only trash journalism and the tabloids, but cheap fiction. It's appealing, it's the same thing as slasher movies. It's just blood and guts. Well, sure, they would say, well, there's always a little crime and something going on, but now that's all they show. All they're doing is trying to appeal to that kind of prurient, bloodthirsty, low-class, uneducated, by God, person. And it's just another example of civilization crumbling before our very eyes. All right. Now let's take probably his son or daughter, be somebody 17 or 18 years old, and assuming they grew up in that kind of house and they're at least literate enough, they're still in high school, or maybe thinking about going to college, you do know in that same household that man and his wife could be college educated, and they both agree that this is just terrible. I mean, it's bad enough what's happening in our schools and blah, 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 but then they'd say, and now the national news no longer gives you information that you can use and to help fulfill sophisticated, wise decisions about who to vote for, what kind of social movement. You just can't do it, because now you turn it on and it is nothing but trash. It might as well be fiction. It's just horrible. And you ask his son or daughter, they would very likely not even be that very passionate about it, not equally passionate, because they're not equally interested. But if you ask them, what do you think about the news shows? And let's say that maybe they're 20, to where they picked up the tail end of some of the stuff of the, when network news was more in favor and considered a real profession, and that even the people sitting there reading the news showed up very high on the, in surveys of who do you trust in the country. And let's say that the person now is 21, 22, something like, and they got a tail end of the other when the news started changing. And you asked them, you said, did you hear what your father and mother just said about the news? And I went, yeah. And they said, what do you think about it? And if they had much of a feeling, if they were happened to be there and watch the news, their feeling would be, well, at least it got more instinct than it used to be. You understand? They would have nothing, they would have not the same negative judgment, to say the least, of the news. Here's what we're getting at. I just picked that again to remind you it's not of any particular reason. I'm not here to grind any axes with the news media. It's just an example of which I figured all of you were aware. Something that's in your face all the time. And it's not just television, it's the major newspapers. Last I heard, it's only the New York Times is holding out. It refuses to, of course they're going to give in sooner or later, but it's only the New York Times here in our country that refuses to put the serial killer's picture and his bloody corpses every day on the front page. I won't make any more jokes, but it's into the print media. It's everywhere. But you understand, from two different generations' views, even in the same household, they would have far divergent views on any change going on. Now, how about the one-ahead reading method? Since I assume I've talked to all of you into your senses and you realize that you laughed too soon last week, that it doesn't make any sense, that you were fooling yourself thinking you knew what it meant. Ha! I just barely know what it means. Okay. What you have to do is, you have to be mentally a generation ahead of where you are physically. That covers it. That is not the description of being more conscious, but it is the description of efforts not to stay where you are. It is a description of the kind of efforts necessary to break you away from the habitual, intellectual, neural operations that will keep you glued right where you are, is to be, and we're, when I say generation, you can consider the degree to which it is allegorical, but you have got to be at least a generation ahead mentally of where you are physically, no matter where you are. Because now consider this. It's another absolute, unconditional example. No unconditional observation without the necessity of a specific example. How about that? And that is, at 20, let's say, to be considered, give you a range, that you're 20 years old and in the middle of society, the middle of the civilized parade, to be considered smart, hip, with it, acceptable to the general peers of your age in the middle of the parade, you have to be going along with whatever is fashionable and hip. Whether it be the hobbies, the games, the music, I mean, it's just simple fact. Everyone knows that, or you're supposed to. It's really heartening, isn't it, when you get to be 22 and you've already forgotten that. Well, hell, that was 2 years ago. I forgot. Could have made it worse. It is absolutely, just think for a second before I put it on you, of all the things that you did when you were a teenager, you're probably at least maybe no later than 20, but things that you just had to do. You simply had to. It was not a matter of sitting around deciding to, but again, assuming that you were in the middle of the parade, at your particular spot in the parade, you had to go along. And you did not feel it that big of an imposition. If you did, you weren't actually in the middle of the parade. You were a geek or a nerd or whatever they called it in your time. You were at the edges of high school civilization, we'll say, teenage civilization. If you were in the heart of it, if you were a cheerleader, if you were on the football team, you didn't give it a second thought. You looked around, it was mohawks. Hey, you got a mohawk haircut. Everybody let their hair grow out. You didn't think about it. It wasn't an imposition. You didn't have to, it was not a late, laborious decision to go, will I start wearing my shoes untied? Will I start wearing them backwards? Will I wear my pants on my head? But you look around and what they're doing, you do it. That is proof. That is absolute proof of your up-to-date intelligence. People at that age do not use the word intelligent. They would just, if you could take them aside, somebody at 20, intelligence, I understand. It's not the word they would use. And they'd say, well, I just want to be popular. I don't want to stand out. Well, they'd be hard-pressed to say that. They'd just say, why do you dress like that? And they go, because it looks good. Well, how come you weren't dressed that way 2 weeks ago before everybody else started doing that? Well, I just realized it. In other words, they would be sane. You couldn't pin them down. See, that's the definition of sanity, is you can't get somebody like you or me to get a sane person and make them admit that they don't know what they're doing. Now, they'll always outsmart you if they're sane. They will. Because no matter, it's like you take their head and you stick it right down before the pool of water. You're going to drown them if they don't see the reflection. I'm just being funny. And they'll be able to explain it away. And you think, well, shit, I'm getting nowhere. But back to the point I wanted you to see. Because it's just something you've never heard described this way, but I'm sure that most of you will get it. They would never say intelligent, but that's what it is. It is a proof of intelligence. It comes from a non-intellectual level. It comes from below, as everything originates in man. It comes from below the level of consciousness. It is simply that if sheep had intellects, and one day you walked up the herd at Sheep High School, and all the sheep now had their wool straightened, you would run home and have your wool straightened. Now, you'd just raise hell with your family. You have got to buy me, you've got to send me over to the shop and get my wool straightened. So it is always, with any pack animal, it is always that you simply cannot stand out and be different. But when it gets to be humans, it is more than that. It's always, because everything, once you're a human, you have an intellect, it is always more than that. Which is why it goes from eating to dining, from sex to romance, from survival to living in a better neighborhood, buying a new house, and all that. So, back to somebody 20 years old, right in the middle, sane, ordinary, decent, the kind of people that we hope will grow up and represent us in Congress, be bureaucrats, just the very kinds of square, non-thinking, dense, limited, conscious people that you want running the world of Caesar. I mean, as if you got to want them to, they're going to run it. But you take them at the age of 20, and there they are fashionable for at least a few years. But I mean, they are fanatically fashionable. And at least some of you were in that boat that you just did. You did not have to think about it. As soon as you got to school one Monday morning or come back from summer vacation, and suddenly everybody's dressed in a certain way. Or all of the really hip people, what you consider hip, now are dressed in a different way. You would probably get sick. I got to go home. Remember, I got a dentist appointment to go home and do it. But do you understand that is an absolute reflection, though they would never say it, is why I'm spending this time, on proof of intelligence. They would never say that. I understand that. If you made them say anything other than, if you could get them to do anything other than say, well, I do it because it looks good. I do it because I want to. If you could get them to say anything, if you had to help them along, you'd say, well, you're actually doing it now because it's fashionable. You might get somebody, think about yourself back then, that you might have been momentarily intelligent enough that if somebody had asked you in a fairly non-committal manner, and they went, well, now you weren't dressed this way, you weren't wearing this kind of shoes or doing your pants backwards or something last year, and you go, well, no. And you go, all I'm asking is, did you just suddenly decide to do that, or today you came to school and you started about like that, and that made you want to do it, didn't it? And you might get somebody, even you back then, you might have gone, well, yeah. In other words, you put it to them like, if nobody else had done it, if nobody else was wearing their pants on their head, would you do it? And the answer is certainly not. Oh, heavens no. And so you could almost get people to go, well, so the best they could say is, well, I want to be part of the crowd. I want to be hip. I mean, what's wrong with that? Of course, nothing. But they're saying, I want to be hip, and to be hip, you have got to be in fashion. You've got to be with the trends of your time at 20. But it is also proof of intelligence. Do you understand? You would never have said that. But it is proof of intelligence, as always, and sometimes it helps to take the other approach. Since the opposite, remember, they don't teach you this in school. Nobody asked me to redo that one. The thing they don't teach you in routine city school, and that is the opposite of everything, is that same thing. So here's the other approach. You would not be intelligent at all did you ignore trends and fashion when you were 20. I think back. There were people in school back then that absolutely ignored them. But you understood. The more they ignored them, I bet everybody can think of somebody. There was some guy or girl, but usually it's a guy you think about, that you just knew, they dropped him on his head when he was young.
No.
Or maybe he moved here from Oklahoma. It's just the guy was just, he wore just anything. And no matter how the styles changed, he like maybe had one pair of brown khaki pants and a pair of flip-flops and one T-shirt. And he wore it for 5 years throughout high school. And just seemed oblivious to it, just do-do-do, that kind of thing. But nobody held it against him. I mean, you laughed at him the first time you ever saw him. Maybe the second day. But then you found out with somebody's cousin. Anyway, somebody says, well, Hubert's been like that ever since grammar school. And you immediately, as soon as somebody pointed out, or as soon as you realized you were the only one laughing at him, the rest of them went, that's just Hubert. And you realized, you knew then that the man is not intelligent. That is, he's not fashionable. And even though you would have never used the word intelligent, as soon as you realized it was not just a fluke, it was not that just Hubert just showed up today for some reason dressed like this. And that just before he called on of what you're supposed to be dressed, you understood by them going, hey, that's Hubert. That's all it took if you were intelligent, is them go, hey, that's Hubert. You understood a wealth of information immediately. You understood that he was not intelligent. You understood that's why he was not fashionable. And therefore, there's no judgment to make. But the point being, even though, again, you wouldn't have said it. Maybe somebody would say, well, he's slow in the head. They get close, but they would never equate that with a lack of being fashionable and trendy. But it is. It's the proof of it is if you are intelligent and you're in the middle of the heart, the middle class of life's parade at any time and place, intelligence is proven. It is evidenced by the fact that you do fit in the fashion. Look at it the other way if you got any doubt. If you don't fit in the fashion, it is evidence. There's no doubt. You are not intelligent. And the further you seem removed from whatever the trend is, trends are, the further you're removed, the more obvious it is that something is wrong up here. You don't even have to, nobody ever analyzes it that way, but it's obvious as soon as it said, that's Hubert. You understood what it meant. It's not going to change. He is not paying attention to fashion. He doesn't understand what's going on. It's Hubert. Leave him alone. And you understood it immediately. Sorry. Because intelligence shows that you have got to be aware of trends and go with them. That is evidence of ordinary intelligence at 20. Now, I know there were people at 20 that were already had been accepted in Mensa. There was somebody at 20 that was smarter than all of you in class, but notice they were not part of the ordinary fashionable, the inside the center of your high school parade. The only intelligence you were interested in, that kind of core, that inside flock, the non-geeky, non-nerdy sheep and cows that were fashionable, they weren't interested in the extremes of Buford or Hubert, who was not intelligent enough neurally, just mentally, physiologically, to even be aware of it. You weren't interested in one or two people that were so out of it, they were so far ahead, IQs of in the high threes, which frightens many people that are fashionable. At any rate, it's not that. The only evidence you wanted evidenced, you and the heart of the parade, the only evidence needed to be shown regarding intelligence was to be fashionable. That's all it took. Of course, you had to pass. You had to make passing grades. But the real intelligence was evidenced by your ability to see, react to positively, and to try to accommodate changing fashion and trends. That's the evidence. That is it at 20. At 50, what is it? Simple. One of the plainest evidence that you are 50 and become wiser, we're still talking about evidence of intelligence, is what? To denounce youthful trendiness. And if we were ordinary, which God forbid that I would think that about you, you would not expect suddenly, instead of Groucho Marx's duck, a little thing of Captain Irony to come down and go quack quack and give you $20. No, that is not. Don't dismiss it. Well, that's irony, or you're being sarcastic. You hear it all the time, but you never analyze it in that way. That is proof, if nothing else. The guy's 50, and he maybe had a college education. That is, he was trendy at the time. It's what I want you to understand. We're not talking about a nerd or a geek that finally made it to 50. We're talking about part of the crowd that was fashionable at 20. You could find exceptions to this, but never mind that, out of a whole crowd. I'm being charitable there, but I always try to be charitable. We're talking about a 50-year-old man. I'm not talking about anybody exceptional. I'm talking about an average 50-year-old man who came from that same kind of middle of the parade background. Let us say very likely a college education, ended up with some large firm. He never got rich, but just good upper middle class or good middle class person. Here he is, 50, raised a couple of kids, just ordinary suburban, middle of the road, middle of the parade, and what is now one of the proofs, one of the evidences that's expected. And you don't really notice it, it's so common. They're having a backyard barbecue. The people in the neighborhood, doctors, attorneys, people, good jobs, IBM, big companies, and there they are, 50, and they discuss this and that about the crabgrass and retirement and IRAs. And then suddenly one of the kids, some of their kids are upstairs in a room, they turn on what the latest music is. And here it is. You know what's coming. And it's people that apparently, it's your parents, ordinary people, the heart and the foundation of the civilized world, intellectually. The evidence, in the same way that back when they were 30 years before, the same crowd, let's say that some of them are still friends from high school, the same way that that crowd knew that once the fashion changed, you knew that your friends of Bill and Mary and Sam, that you knew at least the next day, or within several days, as soon as they can get to a shop, to a clothing store, or a barber shop, they're going to be fashionable. You knew that, you know it. So here you are 30 years later, the same crowd, or you knew the new album by so-and-so, the hottest new group, you know that they're going to come up with that CD, vinyl back then, but they're going to come up with it or die. I mean, they'll drive their parents crazy. They'll go try to shoplift it, or at least they'll lie like, yeah, I got it. 30 years in the future, 30 years on, there they stand, the same crowd, been friends all this time, and no one notices this. It is, on the contrary, if someone did not participate in the scenario I'm about to weave, anyway, it just wouldn't happen, so I have to make them up. But here it goes. So they're out there and they're just having fun, having a few drinks, and suddenly this music comes on of one of their 19-year-old kids, and they look at each other, and it just happens so fast, it might as well be breathing, turning over a steak. It's just so automatic, and one of them will go, did your kids do that too? They call that music now. And three other educated, 50-year-old, sophisticated men, if you can call, dressed in Bermuda shorts or black socks, and swatting, mosquitoes. Anyway, shouldn't do that. Sometime you might be a 50-year-old man in Bermuda shorts and long black socks, but if you are, shoot yourself, please. Well, either that or call Mr. Blackwell and turn yourself in. Don't wait for him to come arrest you. Just at any rate, you know what's coming, don't you? We're talking now. This is not sarcasm. It is not irony. This is life speaking right through men, and they never hear the basis of back to some of these questions. We're not here to take up for anything or to pick on trends. A guy's turning over the steaks, and he says, "Listen to that." And he kind of smiles. It's his kid. It's his house, and he goes, "Do you realize they're calling that music now?" And somebody else, one of his old buddies from high school and college, they might even had a band at one time, made a few bucks. That is, they got some taste in music. And his buddy's going to say, "Yeah, whatever happened? Is Phil Collins still traveling? Whatever happened to Yes?" You know what's going? They're going to say, "Whatever happened to good music like Deep Purple and Yes and the Beatles?" All right, but here it is. If you are back at that level, if you're a 50-year-old person standing there, and you're at that ordinary level of consciousness I've drawn, you're part of that herd. And it's not a pejorative statement. You're part of the civilized common consciousness of now a 50-year-old of that generation. And you're staying there with them. You're not alone. I mean, if you don't care much about music, you just know what they're saying. You could be tone deaf, but be part of that crowd, and they start going, "Listen to them. I mean, God bless them, it's my son, but God, that stuff drives me crazy. I mean, that's not music. That's not the kind of stuff we listen to." And they'll go, "No." And you could be standing over there, part of that herd from high school, and there are people supposedly tone deaf that all of it sound like junk, but you would not alone. They don't have to look at you. You would stand there and know what's going on. You know what they're talking about. They're denouncing fashion that is not their fashion. They're denouncing a younger fashion. It's not better. Forget all that. Well, it is, but I don't confuse any ordinary people that might turn theirs on. They go, wait a minute, you said it was an objective statement. Yeah. But see, if you're part of the ordinary parade, there is no such thing as an objective statement. It does either sound better or worse. But back to people who can hear. Even if you had no taste in music, you would know that you heard them talk, just the words. And you could almost do it if you were out of earshot. Do you know that? What if at the age of 50 you're beginning to have some hearing problems, let's say. And there it is, you're part of that same crowd from high school and college, and they're 20 feet away over there at the grill, and you hear one of them, you just see their lips move, you can hear the sound, the rhythm, one, here it goes. And the guy over there that's about to comment on the music that his kids are playing upstairs, there he is on the patio, he's going. And you're just a little way in your hearing aid. Maybe your battery just went weak. And you see their mouth move, and you catch almost the sound. You can hear him going, and those go, and no. And you know that they're making a critique of something. You know that. And chances are it's a critique. I mean, he pointed, he gave you all kinds of things. And you heard music, even though to you music is just kind of noise. You knew it was something. And you hear him go, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and the rest of them go, hoo-hoo. And there you stand. You're not sure what they said, but internally you'll be going, oh, I couldn't agree more. As much as I may have mentioned, or you thought I had about generations, etc., do you begin to get an idea? It's not that there's something that you can directly attack, but life is arranged in such a way that it will keep you, as you should if you're at the ordinary level, it will keep you involved with a critique, and much of it is so widespread, which is what I'm trying to get you to see with using examples of generations. It is so widespread that you would be extremely, I'm being too charitable, you'd be extremely hard-pressed to find any ordinary person and get them to hear any of this. Maybe for a second, and then they'd look off and forget it. They'd have to. Because it is so widespread that every generation, it's not just music, because people who take the current events and et cetera seriously, a man can turn right around now, and they could be standing on the patio instead of discussing their teenagers' taste in music, they could be discussing such matters as, can you believe that our generation, lived through the horrors of World War II and those fanatics in Europe? Are you keeping up? Before you say anything, where you're basically say, you're going to mention Bosnia. Can you believe that? Still, we have good European stock. People, probably some of our relatives, and over there, they are now running extermination camps right there, and now we have cameras on the spot, and we show them on TV at night, and we're getting so used to that we're not even upset. Sip, and they all go, yeah. And it seems to be much more important than condemning next generation's taste in music, but you understand it's the same thing. Well, I'll put it to you crudely. Every generation goes, well, I used to think sometimes, I'd hear my parents say that life was going to hell. Jesus, I'm glad my father's not here to see it now. You understand? I'm quoting somebody, if not everybody. But you understand, within that is tacitly, without being specific, it's covered everything I'm talking about. Is a man to say, well, I used to hear my father. There's all kinds of unsaid stuff that he's saying in there, that he's admitting, like, I didn't believe it, I didn't understand it, but he remembers. Yeah, I remember my old man continually bitching. My old man, I shouldn't elaborate. I had it right the first time, as always. Editing. Never additions, always editing. Of course, you get to where you think good, you don't even have to edit. You go, zip. Oh, okay. Of course, then sometimes you have to add a few words if you're going to say something. You go, zip. And somebody around you says, what was it? What? And you have to go, oh, all right. Then you have to put words on it. But I hope they're fashionable words. No bell bottoms, no long stringy hair, none of that gold jewelry. They've got to be fashionable words. Back to the sentence. Instead of them denouncing their teenagers' music, the taste of music, one guy says, yeah, they're talking about the horrors now going on in former Yugoslavia. Then there's tribal genocide going on throughout Africa. And I go, my father used to say that the world was going to hell. I mean, he used to say that. I'm glad he's not alive to see it now. Boy, that covers it. There's the history of man at one level, in one sentence as always. But do you understand what he's saying? He's covering actually 3 generations. Because if that was too obscure an insinuation, he is tacitly saying, my old man. See, that's one generation. That's the one before me even. Forget about now him and the next one. But he's talking about the older. He's saying, my old man used to always say, I can hear, he was always complaining that the world was going to hell. Now the part he's not saying, he's saying, well, my old man used to always say the world's going to hell, comma, comma. But there, he is saying that his old man used to say it, but he's saying that he was the younger generation, and he either didn't believe it, or he thought, you're crazy, so I'm not even interested. You understand? That's what he's saying. Yeah, now I can remember my old man used to always say, damn son, the world's going to hell. And the tacit part he's saying is that I was another generation, and I didn't mean crowd. My old man was all right. I had nothing against him. He was a fine guy, but that kind of stuff. It's irrelevant. It's not even true. I didn't care. Now, we're up to the 2nd generation. That's that comma. Now he's saying, now I'm glad. Now he's put himself in. Now I'm glad that the old man's not here. And now he's beginning to point to what's going on now, which is the succeeding generation. The people that are doing the damage now, even though they may not be 20 years old, you understand, he's already compared. Somebody already compared about that the horrors of World War II, what went on 30 years ago, 40 years ago, is nothing compared to what's happened now. And the guy goes, yeah. And he points to the generation, he's going to get 3 of them in one whack. Between turning over a steak and one sip off of a martini. Yeah, I remember. My old man used to always say, the world's going to hell, comma, sip. I'm sort of glad that he's not here now, gone from here to what appears to be the succeeding generation. I'm kind of glad that he's not here to see what's going on now. Turn, sip, sip. He's about covered it, because that is the way it appears. The functional, the pragmatic, to misuse Henry James, but hell, you don't know how he misused you. It was William James. That's how he misused you. He kept telling you, now I remember, he kept saying, no, I'm the one that writes the books on psychology, and it was actually the guy that wrote that cheap fiction. Well, anyway, he's pulled out on us long enough. I'm glad that I finally saw through him. The practical aspect that I was going to get at is back to the backdoor approach, sort of, that I was giving about all of the kinds of methods and approaches that man has come up with. I threw in several to sort of smoke screen you and the blind side you, make you run through a roadblock over a fat state trooper trying to flag you down or make you get in a decent lane or get off the speed bumps. One of them was, since it's obvious what's required from man to bring his attention under control, therefore to set up the right kind of foundation to expand his consciousness, since it's obvious what's required, man has come up, made up a never-ending litany of possible approaches and methods. I mean, to help the man, to help people keep from having to just face up to what it is head on. Life is arranged that you live long enough, you get to be 50 years old, let's say. And it covers, you can remember when you thought things, or your father even said things were bad. Then it got to be you're in the middle there for a while, long about the age of 20 up until some age, and you thought, you didn't analyze it, of course, this way, but you thought, well, I'm going to whip the world. I'll be rich and famous, and nobody will give me any crap. In fact, I may even straighten out the world if I get powerful enough, even if it's just through being a famous musician. I'll get so powerful and people will listen to me so much, I'll begin to pontificate. I'll begin to direct people's intellectual and spiritual lives. Well, that's an old idea of painters, everybody. The whole point is, if I could ever get in charge of the herd of life, the sane herd, I would straighten them out if they just listened to me. And people seriously believe that, while not understanding that every other sane person thinks the same way. Insane people don't think that way. That's another story. I'll leave it to you to figure out which is which. If you have any doubt about which is which, by the way, I might be careful who I went home with tonight, especially if you're driving yourself home alone. It was the backdoor method I was mentioning, that even though there is nothing, even if you said there's nothing specific a man can do to directly go from here to being more conscious, that there's nothing you can specifically do. There's nothing you can specifically do physically, and it's questionable if there's anything you can specifically do mentally. Okay, it's not questionable. There's nothing you can do either way. But there's one thing that I can tell you for sure. There's one thing you can count on. Not just because I tell you, one thing you can count on. If you keep doing what you're doing now, you can't do it. And not just physically, because we tried to already bypass that. If you're staying stoned or drunk every day, you can't do it. I mean, it's not my business. I don't care. You shouldn't either, unless it's you. And if you're stoned and drunk, why would you care? Right? Just don't ever sober up. That's the key. Not only can it laden you with angst, but you might die. I don't know when medicine's going to catch on you. Take a man who's been a drunk for many years and finally talk him out of it. Very likely the man's going to kick it off. But there's one thing you can count on absolutely, that you cannot change what you understand. You cannot change your level of consciousness. You cannot alter it in any manner if you continue doing intellectually what you are now. And that, people will argue it forever. They go, well, wait a minute, you don't know what I'm doing. Yes, I do. No, you don't know specifically. Okay, I don't. So what? It does not matter. But here's what you're faced with. Not to make it seem bad, but I'm trying to get you to look at it another way, that is not a theoretical, and it's not just something I came up off the top of my head to say, well, you certainly can't be more conscious if you keep thinking and considering and listening to, arguing, debating, pondering, musing, ruminating on what you are now. And the whole of life, it's like you got your choice. You can listen to me or listen to life. And any sane person, I mean, it's not a contest. They're not going to listen to me or any other one human when the human is directly contradicting, even if nothing specifically. If it's something specifically, you can say, well, maybe you're right in some areas and wrong in another. But see, I made the blanket statement of anything that life tells you to think about, which is what the generational thing that people saying on the patio. It is life. It's not one generation being smarter or dumber than another. It is life continually pointing out things are not the way they should be, and sometimes they're more glaring and it seems to be getting worse, and you go, yeah. And for somebody to tell you, it ain't yeah, and they go, well, tell me how I'm wrong. And if I was dumb enough to go along with this, I'd say, no, I didn't say you was wrong. Yeah, you did. No, I didn't. Yeah. Where am I wrong? Of course, the answer, I can't answer it. Can you spell everywhere? And nobody, no ordinary mind can deal with that. They will simply dismiss it. They say, well, now, if you're trying to tell me something, I'm broad-minded. If there's something I could do that would improve my intelligence and my understanding of life, tell me what it is. And I go, well, I give it to you easier. Instead of me telling you something specific, I'll make it easier to where you don't have to, whatever it is that you think about now, your normal state of consciousness, the kind of things that you entertain, the kind of things that go through your mind, the kinds of things that you listen and react to, yeah. Your ordinary state of your mental life, yeah. All of that, forget it. You do understand. You are immediately classified, if anybody listened to you that long, you're just crazy. Because the mind cannot go anywhere with that. It's the one-ahead reading method. Every question that a man has, if you understood the one-ahead reading method, it doesn't say that what you're asking is wrong. It's all a trick. You understand? The thing of this mentalist, well, what's my wife's name? Who's going to win the third race at high? It's a trick. And you go, and as soon as I told you the trick, you anybody knew that. That's the whole trick of being mentally alive. Instead of doing a mental trick, is you've got to be mentally, in a generation at least, ahead of where you are now physically. But notice that is so far removed because an ordinary man would find it impossible to try and be in the generation. If you tried to tell a 50-year-old man, which every now and then you see people try to do it, a 50-year-old man or a woman, but the most they can do is try to do it. They're being driven sexually. Just find some 50-year-old woman that's now bleached her hair, whatever's popular, and trying to look like she's 19. Or some guy, with the hairpiece and all the gold chains and dressed up fashionable. And you look at him, he's 65 years old. And everybody, including other 65-year-olds, much less 20-year-olds, and they go, you know, God damn, give us a break. I mean, it's just horrible. Or put another way, that sounds too judgmental. You can't pull it off. How's that? You're not fooling anyone. Okay? So an ordinary person can't even do that. But notice, that's not what I said. I didn't say you had to be up to date. As we say in the mystical business, screw up to date. Being up to date and is another joke back in mystical undergraduate school. I'll go ahead. Being up to date and $1 will get you a cup of coffee at the bus station. You've got to be intellectually a generation ahead of where you are physically. Did you get it?